We're back with the Reverend Al Sharpton, host of MSNBC's Politics Nation, MSNBC contributor Melissa Harris Perry of The Nation, and Goldie Taylor from thegrio.com, which is part of NBC News. Thanks for staying and continuing this conversation. Melissa, I'm just going to read you one of the tweets from today, actually, from Mark Convalius, who says, Lawrence, I would love to stomp you into the ground, and goes on and on and on with violence. He was then backed up by someone else who said, I know where he lives, and I'm not afraid of going to jail for doing it. So Rush Limbaugh wasn't the only one angry about this. Melissa, go ahead. I'm going to just get out of the way here with the few minutes we have left. Melissa, I know you wanted to react to what Reverend Al was saying.
Well, I was going to say that there's a part of me that just wants to say, well, I'm glad it's you this week getting those tweets, because last week it was me. But obviously that kind of violence talk is precisely what we don't need. That said, I'm sorry, I was trying to be a good guest, but as I was listening to Reverend Sharpton, I just kept wanting to jump in with a kind of, I felt like I was in church and I wanted to say amen, because some of what Reverend Sharpton was pointing to there are really the critical issues for African-American voters in a very broad and long historical sense. And that is this idea that they are not agentic, that they can't make their own choices, that African-Americans, because we tend to vote in large blocks, sort of better than 80% of the race's vote going to first the Republican Party in the years following the Civil War, and then to the Democratic Party after a transition, first with FDR and then with the 1964 Civil Rights and 1965 Voting Rights Act. So it looks like, oh, they're just a herd and they all go one way. And obviously, you hear a lot on the left these days calling African-American voters Obama bots or Obama drones for continuing to support the President of the United States. And I just really want to put my finger on this and say that is precisely the kind of infantilizing of adult persons who are citizens of these United States that is so troubling. And it was troubling to hear Herman Cain do it. It is troubling when it happens from white allies on the left. African Americans make choices like other citizens based on a wide variety of policy issues. It just turns out that consistently in this country, one party or the other tends to do significantly better in terms of economic and political questions relative to African American communities. And so the notion that it is brainwashing rather than choice, I think, is incredibly upsetting for African Americans to hear, whether it comes from the left or the right.
Goldie, go ahead.
I think I have to agree with that. I think, if you look at African Americans and you look down into the psychographic, you'll find that African Americans are by and large socially conservative. And so we happen to agree with Republicans on a number of conservative issues. We're in church once, twice, some of us 3 times every week. And so we're a faith-driven community. And so to say that we won't consider conservative ideals is really just a misnomer. I think what we won't consider is a party that we see, at least in my lifetime, and I was born in 1968, in my lifetime, hasn't been particularly aligned, with the kinds of values that would advance the African American community, whether socially, economically, or otherwise, or open more opportunities for, us as a community. I think that is where the difference lies. It isn't necessarily in the brainwashing. We're doing the math. We're with those candidates and with those parties who we feel like invest in us in a short and long term. Herman Cain hasn't been a kind of candidate who has shown any empathy for that, despite how he's come to growth in this nation, and neither of any of the other candidates on that side of the table. And so it's difficult for us as African Americans to even consider it in a serious way. And I think that's the substantive part of this, is if they want to earn African American votes, they have to come into the African American community and not talk, but listen and really understand what the travails really are, what the issues really are, and come up with substantial, significant solutions to help us solve them. That's how you win votes back, by listening. But all they do these days, it seems to be talking.
Reverend Al, go ahead, Reverend.
Lawrence, let me just say this, and let me be very candid about this. I think on 2 points. One, people are still marching. I'm still marching. A lot of us are still marching, and it's still dangerous. I've been stabbed in my lifetime leading a march. People are being pepper sprayed down at at Wall Street now, at Occupation Wall Street. So it is still some risk. To act like these people are un-American or mobs, and Herman Cain to call them un-American, call blacks brainwashed, question the president's birth certificate, and then you can't ask him about where he was in his college days on an issue he raised, give me a break. I mean, he can say whatever he wants, but then if somebody just raises a question to him about the basis of him making those statements, then all of a sudden he runs and says, you're telling him how to be black? No, maybe we're asking for consistency here. If you thought it was all right to march, but you didn't march, then why is it wrong to march now? If you thought one way, then why you question not somebody's race, but question where a man was born when he's the president of the United States? So if Herman Cain wants to throw rocks, he should at least be open to someone asking him questions.
Melissa, I think that's exactly right, Reverend Al.
Go ahead, Goldie.
I think that's exactly right. I think if you're going to have a party who, throws inflammatory things like saying the president was educated in a madrasa, or that he was born in Kenya, or that and so I think those issues, or Herman Cain himself saying that President Obama isn't a real black man, as if he's standing in line handing out the cards. And so I think that when you use that kind of imagery and you can't, celebrate the kind of African-American man President Obama has turned out to be, but you turn around and celebrate the kind of African-American man that Herman Cain has turned out to be, I think there's a bit of irony in that you can celebrate one but not the other because they don't happen to agree with you ideologically. And I think that's problematic for the GOP.
We're just about out of time for this, and we're not going to get to the discussion of Vietnam service, in which I wanted to try to explain my frame of that. But Melissa Harris Perry, please give us the last word on this. We're running out of time.
Well, maybe I shouldn't have the last word, but I'd say, I absolutely agree with what both Goldie and Reverend Sharpton are saying. But I will just repeat again, though, it did make me squirm. Had those questions been asked in exactly that sort of forthright way by Reverend Sharpton, not because he's black, but rather because he has a very personal history, obviously, with the American Civil Rights Movement that is kind of unquestionable, I don't think it would have made me feel as uncomfortable. And I just want to acknowledge that as much as I completely disagree with Herman Cain's positions, I was made uncomfortable by that particular interracial interaction. And I think that matters, too. And we should be willing to pause and think about how the continuing realities of American race and American racism mean that when we're having frank discussions across racial lines, it can still be a very, very difficult set of conversations to have.
Well, I agree with that. I know she had the last word, but let me just say this quickly. I agree with what she said, but Lawrence, do me a favor. If a white candidate said blacks were brainwashed, ask them where they were during the Civil Rights Movement if they're old enough.
Exactly. I will absolutely do that. And I just want to also specify that Melissa Harris Perry is not the only friend of mine who had exactly that uncomfortable reaction to what they were watching.
Well, she's my teacher. I'll have to read what she writes about.
Reverend Al Sharpton, Melissa Harris Perry, and Goldie Taylor, I cannot thank you enough for coming in tonight and having this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.